The rain had been falling since evening, thick and unforgiving, soaking through the brittle roof panels of Reyser Boone's barn as if it were trying to cleanse the land of something deeper than dust, something that had lived inside it too long regret, maybe, or memory. Reyser didn't care much for signs from above anymore. He'd fought in the last Eurasian Rift conflict, lost a leg, a wife, and a son in the same year, and learned that God's alien or human didn't listen to the kinds of men who asked questions too late. His face was cut with quiet lines of grief that no one in town ever dared mention, and his voice carried a stillness that had nothing to do with peace. He lived alone on the edge of Caden Hollow, Kansas, where cornfields met silence, and the local folks didn't ask why he spoke so little or stared too long at the horizon. They just knew him as Ray, the broken soldier who drank black coffee without sugar and fixed rusted things that didn't need fixing. It was just past midnight when the sky erupted with something that did not belong. No. Thunder, no lightning, only a sound of air tearing like paper, and then a tremor that didn't shake the ground but folded it for a second, like it had knelt to something coming. The barn doors snapped open in the gust, and Reyser stepped out, one hand resting on the worn rifle slung across his back, not because he expected trouble, but because trouble had a way of visiting places too quiet for too long. What he saw streaking down from the stars wasn't a plane, or a satellite, or anything Earth had ever built. It was shaped like a thorn blooming, in reverse, glowing violet at its edges, trailing light that shimmered like underwater fire. It was falling fast, dying maybe, and it disappeared behind the rows of trees that bordered his land. For a moment he stood still, and then he moved, limping out into the wet soil, dragging the past behind him like a shadow that refused to writhe. Reached the crater in 7 minutes. And in that crater, alive and unconscious, was someone he couldn't name. Her skin shimmered with colors his brain didn't know how to place silver and dusk, layered like smoke and moonlight, and her body was curled within a cracked pod that pulsed like a sleeping heart. She wore a crown of breathing crystal, and her hair spilled out like strands of obsidian wire. Her hands were clawed and trembling, and her chest rose and fell as if each breath was borrowed from something ancient and finite. Reyser didn't run he should have, but something in the way she looked broken without being weak, in the way her face was tilted toward the stars like she had fallen, while still longing to rise, made him take a step forward, then another. He knelt beside her and saw the blood-thin and pale blue seeping from a crack in her ribcage. And when she whispered, it wasn't in English, but the pain in her voice needed no translation. He reached out, touched her shoulder, and for the first time in years, his hands didn't shake from rage or withdrawal. She opened her eyes, and he forgot the Rainer. Name came like wind between dying trees. Xeivara. She tried to speak again, but her voice fractured like ice. Over deep water. She pointed toward the stars, then to herself, then curled up again, as if hiding from something that was already coming. Reyser didn't know why he lifted her, didn't to know why he wrapped her in his jacket and carried her through mud and lightning. Back to the barn, but something inside him whispered that this woman wasn't running from war, she was running from something worse, and they would follow. They always did, somewhere in the cold corridors between dying stars, where light moved slower and screams lasted longer. The Oblivion Armada reassembled inside the core vessel Xeivara, a ship so massive it carried cities inside its hull and echoes inside its teeth. Commander Zhayt'Ra-Morth stood at the front of the throne chamber, if one could call it that, because this wasn't a place of rule. It was a cathedral of execution. He didn't sit. He never did. His armor, shaped like fossilized flesh and embedded with shards of psychic bone, made his silhouette look more like a blade than a man. He'd once been the brightest among the high court, the Merakai, the same court that had crowned Xeivara as queen of their galaxy hive, the same court that had cursed her when she chose empathy over annihilation. Zhayt'Ra hadn't questioned the decree to erase her, he asked. Had loved her once, if a Marakai could love. His memories of her were preserved in mind seal orbs illegal to access now, punishable by death, but he wore one around his neck still, hidden beneath the bone plate of his throat. He called it treason. Others called it obsession, but Zhayt'Ra called it justicer. Betrayal had not merely endangered the supremacy of their hive, it had infected it with weakness. She had spared a lesser race. She had allowed a primitive species to survive against orders, and in doing so, she had fractured the unity of the Galactic Code. To him, she had murdered the foundation they had built together with blood and stardust, and now she had fled not into hiding on some advanced world, not into a vortex or between dimensions where gods whispered. She had fled to Earth an unranked, pitiful, unarmored mud sphere, whose species thought love could fix anything, and whose weapons still relied on combustion. Pathetic she was mocking him. Zhayt'Ra raised his right hand, fingers bent like iron, and the war echo responded. Hundreds of ships, each carved from the husks of star serpents and fueled by living matter, began to pulse with light as they prepared for jump. The coordinates to Earth's solar edge had been decoded from the last psychic trace she left when her escape pod bent through the fold string. It was weak, but enough. Earth would not remain untouched, not because it was a threat, but because it had sheltered her. His second in command, Trixie Val, approached, her face hidden behind a lattice of shifting glass. She never questioned his rage, only sharpened it. The fleet is in position. Planet Earth shows no signs of interstellar defense. Primitive civilization, divided by language, ideology, tribal flags. Their largest satellite is primarily used for entertainment. Zhayt'Ra turned his eyes toward the dark beyond the glass walls of the command deck. Then let them entertain us as they die screaming. He gave the signal. The fleet entered the fold stream like knives into velvet, and behind them, reality stitched itself back together with sparks that smelled like charred hope iron board the ships. Deepest chamber, the memory orb around Zhayt'Ra's neck pulsed once, and in it, a memory played of Xeivara touching his face, whispering something he had refused to hear back then, something soft, something that still echoed, even now far across the void. Xeivara stirred on a blanket in Reyser's barn, her breathing shallow, her hands twitching. She whispered his name again, in her native tongue, not to curse him, but to warn him, because she could feel him coming, and she knew he wouldn't stop at just her blood. He would burn everything she had touched, including the man who had carried her out of the dark. The barn smelled of old hay and engine, oil, the kind that had soaked into the wood long ago and never left, and the rain outside had turned to a dull, steady whisper, like the sky had grown tired of screaming. Reyser sat on the edge of the bench he dragged over beside her, the alien queen now wrapped in a patched army blanket he hadn't touched in years. It still carried the scent of fire, desert sand, and things he didn't speak about, and for some reason, he thought maybe she understood that, because she hadn't thrown it off. She hadn't spoken again since he brought her in. Her eyes had opened and closed, flickering like broken light bulbs, and her breathing had stayed low and sharp. The kind you hear in someone fighting not to die. He hadn't called anyone, didn't call the sheriff. Didn't call Homeland, didn't even grab his phone. There was something about her, something in the way she didn't beg for help and didn't threaten him either. That reminded him of the look soldiers had when they knew they were bleeding out, but didn't want anyone to notice. And Reyser had always been the kind of man who noticed. He pulled out a bottle of filtered water and a spoon, and he crouched down next to her. "All right, stranger. You're not exactly local, and I figure you don't drink whiskey. So let's start with this, huh?" Her eyes opened again, brighter this time, less wild, and her lips parted slowly. Not poisoned? Her voice sounded like it had. Been torn in two, soft and cracked, and shaped from a language not built for Earth's gravity. But the words were clear enough to make Reyser freeze for a moment. No, he said quietly. Not poisoned, just water. From the Earth, even. Welcome, by the way. She tried to smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Earth still has water. That's rare. He laughed, a dry, unexpected sound that surprised even him. We? Waste most of it, but yeah, it's still here. Her hands moved slowly from under the blanket, and she held the spoon with care, like it might break or vanish if she touched it wrong. She drank, barely, her throat working like each swallow was a negotiation between her body and something unseen. Reyser watched in silence, not asking questions yet, not pushing. He didn't need to. He was a man who had seen too many things crumble when they were rushed. She took one more sip, then rested her head back, eyes half-lidded. You carried me. You are injured. He looked down at his leg, the prosthetic. One old and dull under the denim. Yeah, not recent. You're observant. She was quiet then. You should have left me. He shook his head slowly. That's what the world's been doing to people for decades. Leaving them. I'm tired of it. She stared at him for a long time, not just looking stunning, as if trying to figure out what kind of creature would carry an alien queen from a crater without asking why. Her voice came again, weaker but steady. Xeivara, that is what I am. Was. It means. She who commands the silence. He nodded once. Reyser Boone, just Reyser now. Not much left to command? She closed her eyes again. The sky is opening. They come in the hundreds. Death... Where's ships now? He leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. Who? Who's coming? Her. Fingers twitched as if they could already feel the heat of the engines. The psychic weight of Zhayt'Ra-Morth's fleet, pressing down from light years away. Murakai, Armada. They will find me. They burn what I touch. Reyser didn't understand all of it. Not yet, but he understood enough. She was hiding, and something vast, angry, and merciless was hunting her. She shivered once. And he reached out, covering her hand with his own calloused, rough, real, and she didn't pull away. Shh. He whispered, barely audible. If you keep me, they'll come for you too. And Reyser Boone, broken soldier and quiet farmer of dead soil, only nodded once. I've been waiting a long time for something worth standing in front of. It began with static, not the kind that crackled through radios when a storm rolled in, but a sound that bled through every screen, every speaker, every satellite transmission in orbit-scratched frequencies and low pulses, like something breathing behind the wires. The world didn't notice at first. They thought it was interference from solar flares, maybe military testing. But Reyser Boone knew better, because Xeivara had stopped breathing in her sleep, not from death, but from listening. She lay stiff on the barn cot, eyes wide and glowing faintly, her pupils locked upward, her lips moving in fragments of language that didn't belong to this earth. And Reyser, standing in the doorway with the wind crawling through his shirt, felt something stir in the air. Something massive. Something old. He looked toward the sky and saw nothing not yet, but she whispered, her voice thin and sharp. They're near. They fold space as they breathe. You won't see them. Until they want to be seen. 2 hours later, the Pentagon's inner war room went silent as the monitors blinked black, then white, then blood red. A single phrase appeared in a dialect. No machine could fully translate, but every human instinct understood return. The Queen, or be rewritten. The President didn't blink. He leaned forward and asked for identification. No nation claimed responsibility. No hack detected, no glitch found. But when the high-orbit telescope relays came online again, there was no need for translation. 317 vessels had entered Earth's gravitational shadow, some shaped like spines, some shaped like wings, some shaped like hands that had never meant to heal, and they were waiting in Kansas. Reyser pulled the heavy tarp back from the radio tower he'd left rusting. Since the war, he hadn't touched the thing in years, but he knew enough about long-wave jammers to scramble military intercepts for a while. Long enough to keep them out of his barn. He turned back toward her, still watching the sky through the cracks in the old wood beams. "They're in orbit, aren't they?" She nodded slowly. "They wait for command. They will not ask twice." He didn't ask what they would do if Earth refused. He already knew, and he knew what Earth would do to call her a threat, offer her up trade. A queen for a piece they'd never get, and kill her before they ever understood who she really was. "Then we need to move you," he said, pulling on a canvas coat, checking the truck fuel. "They'll find this place first. They always find the ones who don't run." Xeivara rose slowly, legs still uncertain, but eyes hardening with a light he hadn't seen in her before. "They will burn the soil. They will scream the sky apart. But they will not take me breathing." Reyser looked at her, really looked, and understood for the first time that she wasn't just fleeing. She was choosing to live, choosing to fight, and maybe, for the first time, choosing not to run alone 50 miles east. A Homeland Tactical Response convoy rolled through the back roads. The signal had traced something strange to Caden Hollow, an unknown crash signature, followed by multiple electromagnetic spikes. Agent Merrick Dorn, in the lead truck, stared at the screen that showed fluctuating heat readings in the shape of a humanoid figure beside an old barn. He tapped the edge of the monitor and spoke without turning his head. "We're not just dealing with a meteor strike. This is live. Whatever's out there, it's not ours. And it's not theirs either." The soldier next to him frowned. "Sir, should we call in local reinforcements?" "No, we go quiet." He hadn't told anyone yet, but he recognized that barn Reyser Boone's old squadmate Aya's old ghost, and for the first time since the invasion warning came, Merrick felt something deeper than fear. He felt history rising from the dirt above them all. In orbit, Zhayt'Ra-Morth stepped forward through the obsidian veil of the command deck, a planet glowing beneath him like a forgotten relic, untouched and undeserving. "Transmit again," he growled, his voice cracking through the air like sharpened bone. "This world forgets who we are. Remind them." His ships began to spread light, fingers tightening in below. In a barn that had never been anything but silent, Reyser and Xeivara stepped out into the wind together. Night had not ended, but the wind had gone still, as if even the air itself was waiting to choose sides. The truck's tires rolled over cracked backroads, cutting through the fog like a whisper. Reyser drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the shotgun across his lap, not because he thought he'd use it, but because having it there gave him a moment's worth of control over a situation that was unraveling faster than the laws of physics allowed. Xeivara sat beside him, wrapped in one of his old flannel jackets. It didn't fit right, not around her shoulders that shimmered faintly when she breathed, but she didn't seem to mind. Her face was turned to the window, not watching the road or the trees blurring past, but staring upward, past the clouds, past the sky toward something Reyser couldn't see. Not yet. He had questions. 100 of them, but only one left his mouth. What did you do to make them want you dead so badly? She didn't answer right away. She didn't even blink. And then she reached out her fingers, pale and smooth, touched his temple, and his foot lifted off the gas without him noticing, because everything changed. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a memory. It was something between, like falling into someone else's past while still holding on to your own heartbeat. Reyser stood inside a star chamber of blinding light, and before him, Xeivara knelt on a floor made of whispering metal. She was younger, or maybe less burdened, her crown still glowing whole and untouched. Before her, thousands of alien children knelt in silence, their skin translucent and their bodies wired with light. He could feel what was happening even before. He saw Ida genocide ritual a planetary reset, and Xeivara was meant to give the final command one word from her, and the sky would fall on a species they had never asked to be judged. But she didn't speak. She turned her head and said no Reyser could hear. The silence after that word like it had weight. Like it broke bones. Behind her, Zhayt'Ra-Morth stepped forward, armor gleaming, voice like a blade being drawn from a bone sheath. You defy the code. She stood, alone, against all of them. Compassion is not treason. Compassion, Zhayt'Ra whispered, is decay. Then he took her crown, crushed it, and marked her for erasure. The vision snapped back, and Reyser gasped like he'd been drowning. They were still in the truck, still on the road, but his hands were shaking now, from fear but from rage. You spared them, he whispered. You gave up everything. She didn't look at him. I thought if I ran far enough, I could bury what I had done. But they do not bury betrayal in my world. They chase it. He glanced at her again, and this time he didn't see an alien. He saw a woman who had stood against a machine too massive to defy, and who had walked into exile rather than sell her soul to it. You are right to run, he said, but I don't think you should run anymore. She turned to him, eyes full of light and ache. Then I must stand, but if I do, Earth will fall beside me. No, Reyser said, voice low and steady. Earth stands with you. Elsewhere, miles away, inside a tactical van parked on a hill near the outskirts of Caden Hollow, Agent Merrick Dorn stared at the blurry heat map on the monitor, the dots showing movement of vehicle heading northeast, leaving Boone's land. Fast. They're moving her, he said aloud. Behind him, his partner adjusted her sidearm. Orders are to detain and contain. If she resists, we neutralize. Merrick didn't answer, because deep in his chest, something stirred, something old. He hadn't seen Reyser in years, not since the desert burned half their squad alive, but he remembered how the man stood his ground when others fled, how he carried dead weight when others collapsed, and he knew this. If Reyser Boone was protecting something, it wasn't a threat. It was a cause. He closed the laptop, stood up, and said, change of plan. We intercept, but we don't shoot first. His partner frowned. You think this thing is worth trusting? I don't trust her, Merrick said, grabbing his gear. I trust him. Above, in orbit, the warship stirred again. One vessel, the Reyser throne, detached from formation and began descent. Engines silent, but glowing. Zhayt'Ra watched it go. Would not lead the first strike. That was not his way. He would watch Earth. Resist, he would watch it hope, and then he would unmake it, because Xeivara had betrayed him with her heart. And now he would tear hers from the sky. The Reyser throne broke through the clouds without a sound. Not with fire, not with screaming metal, just light pure, and white and wrong. Like a hole torn into the sky where logic was supposed to bait, hovered above the eastern seaboard for exactly 41 seconds before it opened. Not with missiles or lasers, not with the kind of weapons Earth expected, but with pressure. Psychic force, vast and unseen, fell downward in waves, and people collapsed without being touched. Blood vessels ruptured. Phones shattered. Dogs howled at nothing. In New York, subway lights flickered and pulsed like lungs choking on air. In Berlin, power grids screamed offline. In Tokyo, pilots blacked out mid-air for 3 terrifying seconds, and everywhere, the same words repeated in broken speech across all frequencies, on all devices, in every language the Murukai had stolen and perfected. Return the Queen, or drown in her silence. Reyser's truck screeched to a halt on the shoulder of an abandoned service road near an old water tower. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the horizon glowed red. Not from warning, Xeivara stepped out slowly, eyes closed, face turned toward the sky. Her breathing was steady now, but her voice had changed, lower, fuller, like every word carried the weight of someone remembering their crown. "They've begun their first message," she said quietly. "This is how they ask." Reyser stared at the horizon. "That's asking?" She opened her eyes. "The next time, they will not ask." He didn't know where to go anymore, didn't know if there was any place on Earth that could hide her. Now he didn't even know why he still thought hiding mattered. But then the sharp, grinding sound of tires kicked up behind them, and Reyser turned with his hand on his rifle. Two black SUVs, government-plated, unmarked but obvious, and Merrick Dorn stepped out older than Reyser remembered, with gray dusting the sides of his hair, and the same steady eyes he'd had when they pulled bodies out of the burning ridge in Syria. Years ago, he raised both hands, slow, careful. "I didn't come to kill her." Reyser didn't lower his weapon. "But you'll hand her over?" "No," Merrick said, glancing toward Xeivara, who watched him like a falcon reading wind. "Not until someone explains why the hell the sky's bleeding, and my techs can't stop coughing blood from looking at a live feed." "She's not the cause," Reyser said. Merrick's voice was quiet. "No, but they are." The three of them stood there, soldier, alien, agent at the edge of a crumbling country road, while the stars above twisted slightly out of place then. A sound cut through the night, a deep, low howl, and Xeivara's knees buckled. She dropped to one side, her fingers pressed to her temple. Her jaw clenched tight. Reyser caught her before she hit the ground. "What is it?" he asked. "They've released the preceptors," she whispered, voice strained. "Mind burners. They will reach Earth's neural grid. They will unravel thought itself." Reyser looked up at Merrick. "They're not just going to kill us. They're going to erase how we remember being alive." Merrick didn't hesitate. "We get her underground. I've got access to a cum shelter 15 miles west, hardened against EMP, buried under 70 feet of soil. They'll have to pull the Earth open to find it." Reyser nodded. "Go. I'll follow you." They got her back in the truck, but not before Xeivara reached up, grabbed Reyser's arm, and locked eyes with him. "I cannot run anymore," she said. "I must do what they fear." He looked at her like a man staring down a path that didn't have a return sign. "Which is?" Her voice was steady. "Now I must connect." In orbit, aboard the high chamber of the Drathsam Veros, Zhayt'Ra-Morth stepped toward the panoramic nerve glass and watched as one of Earth's cities, small, distant, nameless, went dark. Not from fire, but from silence. He didn't smile. He didn't feel joy, only purpose. Xeivara approached from the shadows. 3 more cities responding to the signal. 10 more will fall before sunrise. They resist. Some hide her. Zhayt'Ra's voice was colder than space. "They do not hide her. They ignite her." He turned to his second in command. "Prepare my descent. I will take Earth's breath myself." In the dark below, inside the truck racing toward the bunker, Xeivara sat upright, her fingers twitching. She began to hum a low tone that made Reyser's vision blur for a moment, and made Merrick grip the wheel tighter. "What the hell are you doing?" Merrick asked. She looked at him, and her eyes were no longer just glowing. They were broadcasting. "I am opening a link," she whispered, "to every mind willing to see me." The bunker was older than anyone alive who had ever stepped inside it. It sat beneath a forgotten field where wheat hadn't grown in 30 years, buried behind rusted fencing and outdated maps. Once designed to survive nuclear winter, it was now used for nothing until tonight. Merrick's clearance still worked. 3 security layers opened in sequence, and then they were inside. Thick concrete, cold air, silence stitched with power hums, and flickering backup lights. There were no weapons here, no operatives, no surveillance feeds, no war rooms, just space. Dead, quiet space. Xeivara walked in without stumbling. Her body had begun to change. Subtly, Reyser could see it now. The shimmer of her skin had dulled, replaced by a deeper current of energy beneath her surface. Not bright, but dense. Not beautiful, but terrifying. Reyser turned to her as she stood in the center of the main room, palms open, her eyes half closed, the way people stand when they've stopped waiting for someone else to act. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't answer with words. Not at first. Her hands moved outward, fingers carving shapes into air, as if the very molecules obeyed her memory. Around her, sparks floated up, colorless and small, like forgotten stars learning to be born again. Merrick backed toward the wall slowly. "Is this safe?" "No," she whispered. "But it is necessary." She turned to face Reyser fully, her voice clear now, not foreign, not strained, but human-shaped. "I have carried silence long enough." She raised both hands, and the world inside the bunker blinked. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but Reyser felt it like pressure in his skull, like something brushing across the inside of his thoughts. Not speaking, but touching, and then he saw it not with eyes, but with everything, a spiral of minds, a web of memories, not from her to her, from everywhere. People around the world were feeling it, subtle, soft, a presence threading into them, like a memory they hadn't made yet. A child in Jakarta paused while painting. A soldier in Ukraine dropped his rifle and wept. A prisoner in Sao Paulo fell asleep for the first time in weeks without screaming. She was connecting not to Earth satellites, not to governments, but to people. Reyser staggered slightly, eyes wide. "You're reaching into the species?" She nodded once, not to command, to ask. Merrick turned away, his hands gripping his knees. "Jesus, this is a broadcast. You're waking them up to you, to your truth." Xeivara's voice was calm and steady. "Truth does not survive in silence, but in memory. In memory, I become more than hunted." Reyser looked at her then, really looked, and realized what she was becoming. She was no longer a refugee, no longer only the queen who ran. She was rising again, not to rule, but to rally above the planet. The Drathsum Veros dimmed for a full second. Zhayt'Ra blinked as power across the fleet fluctuated, for a race like the Marakai, who spoke through memory and encoded emotion as language. Xeivara's signal wasn't just an echo, it was an infection. One by one, ships in the fleet began to show drift, pilots disoriented, weapons misfiring, neural linkers disconnecting from command. He felt her, inside the bones of his mind, and in that moment, for the first time in centuries, Zhayt'Ra felt fear. He roared a psychic scream that split the walls of the command deck, and he hurled the memory orb of her face across the floor, shattering it in 6 clean pieces. "She dares," he growled, teeth clenched. "She dares to build again." Trixie Val emerged from the corridor, her tone unreadable. "Our internal minds are fragmenting. Half the fleet is requesting mental reintegration. Some are remembering." Zhayt'Ra's hands shook. "They forget what she is. She betrayed us." "No." A quiet voice came behind him, one of the pilots, younger, breathing hard. "She chose something else." Zhayt'Ra turned and crushed him with a glance, his body frozen, lifted, cracked, and dropped without ceremony. "Prepare my descent." Back on Earth, the broadcast settled like dust in every mind that let it in, and Xeivara lowered her hands. Merrick looked around, dazed. "So what now?" She turned to them both, calm as wind before a storm. "Now we answer." "Answer what?" Reyser asked, stepping forward. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever before. The final call of the exiled queen. And far above them, in the black that had hidden knives for so long. Zhayt'Ra's personal dropcraft pierced through the cloud line like a fang coming home to end her or to fall with her either way. The end had arrived. Sky didn't open with fire, it opened with weight, a gravity unlike Earth's own, pressing down in invisible fists, warping the clouds into spirals and making trees bend without wind. People all over the world looked upward, unaware of names or causes, feeling only the shudder of something vast and ancient pressing close to their atmosphere, something that had come for someone at the edge of an old wheat field in Kansas. Beneath a blanket of dying stars, Zhayt'Ra-Morth stepped from his descent pod. He did not wear armor now. He was armor. His body moved like steel wrapped in flesh. His eyes jet-black pits of fury, so deep they had no reflection. Where he stepped, the ground cracked. Where he breathed, the grass grayed, and at the center of the field stood Xeivara, bareheaded now, no crown on her brow, only light blooming faintly from her skin, the shimmer of a queen who had remembered who she was, but no longer cared about. Being obeyed, Reyser stood behind her renarmed Soletter Gray. Ra's voice rolled across the field like thunder buried in stone. You have poisoned them. You've made your rot into music. Her voice came back without tremble. I gave them memory. I gave them choice. You were meant to cleanse, he growled, stepping forward, not feel. You were meant to lead, she whispered, not consume. The pause between them lasted 5 heartbeats, and then Zhayt'Ra lunged out. It was not a duel in the way. Earth knew it. There were no weapons, no fists, no blades, It was mind against mind, will against will. The space between them shimmered, then shattered, an invisible shockwave exploding outward. Merrick fell to his knees. Reyser staggered back, gripping the rusted frame of the truck as reality rippled. Birds froze mid-flight. Machines shut down. Time cracked at its edges. Xeivara didn't fall. She rose her feet, left the earth. Her eyes became twin novas, and her voice was not a voice anymore. It was a song layered in ancient chords. In every language Earth had ever whispered and forgotten, and she pushed. Zhayt'Ra screamed, not in pain, but in resistance, because she wasn't trying to kill him. She was showing him everything the children she spared, the voices that remembered her not as a queen, but as a mother of mercy, the galaxies she had refused to burn, the faces of 1,000 species. That had survived because she had said one word no, but Zhayt'Ra could not be remade. He lashed out with a final surge of hatred, unleashing the Starblight Protocol, an energy virus encoded into his bloodstream, capable of unraveling not just matter, but memory itself. It spiraled upward toward Earth's orbit, toward every mind she had. Xeivara turned and intercepted it. She took it all, let it pass into her, not around her, and she held it, not with rage, but love, the kind of love that chose to suffer so others wouldn't have to. Her body arched backward, light searing from every inch of her, and she looked at Reyser. One last time, her voice only in his head now. Tell them, we are not always monsters. And then she became light, not exploded, not destroyed, ascended her body, turned to dust that sparkled and scattered across the sky, threading itself into the clouds, sinking into the wind, whispering into the lungs of every child born after that day. Zhayt'Ra, robbed of his purpose, fell to his knees, cracked open by the very memory he had tried to erase, then faded like a scream swallowed by silence. Weeks passed, and months. No second wave ever came. No ships returned. The Maracai Armada fractured and vanished into the void. Leaderless and broken Earth survived, but it did not forget. Reyser Boone sat beneath the same broken sky, now painted with lights that hadn't been there before, thin silver ribbons that danced when no wind. Blue people called it the Queen's Veil. Scientists couldn't explain it. Children prayed beneath it, and sometimes, when the wind was just right and the clouds parted just So, you could hear something like music, a single voice, singing in a language no one knew, but somehow everyone understood, and in the end, it was true she had come to Earth to hide, but she stayed. To save it not with weapons, but with memory, and they would remember her always not as the queen who ran, but as the queen who rose.